Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Rationally Speaking with me, Stuart Carrington, and my colleague Martin Turner.
Hey everybody.
So as we've done previously, we wanted to show everyone like maybe some clips, some like documentary footage, interview footage with kind of high profile people or athletes. And we're going to sort of stick to that theme today. And we're going to watch a very short clip of the Croatia captain, Luka Modrić, talking to his goalkeeper, Livaković. And this conversation occurred at the beginning of the World Cup in Qatar in 2022. And going into the World Cup, Livaković, the goalkeeper, had made a few mistakes, kind of relatively high-profile mistakes in the build-up, in qualifying and in the warm-up games. And there were kind of some doubts whether he would continue to be Croatia's first-choice goalkeeper as a result. And Modric's captain kind of seeks an opportunity to speak to him. And we're going to watch some, maybe like 90 seconds of footage, but of that conversation. And as we progress through that conversation, Martin and I are just going to stop it at some points and just kind of explore what Modrić does, but through an REBT lens.
Yeah, and I suppose part of the reason we're going to do that is because it's got subtitles. So if you're just listening to us and not watching, then you're obviously not going to see those subtitles. But every now and again, we'll kind of pause and talk about what's going on in sort of the scene, as it were. Because actually each bit is quite interesting, isn't it, Stu?
Well, we certainly think so, and we think it's particularly interesting to explore what occurs, but like I said, through that lens of REBT.
100%. All right, let's go.
U takvim trenucima je najbitnije da suigrači osjete da je neko iza njih, da imaju podršku. Golmanska je situacija specifična, su sami.
So you're saying there essentially that you got to, when you're in a team, you got to have your teammates' backs. It's really important, especially going into important situations. And that goalkeepers are specific because they're essentially alone, which is quite an interesting take about being a goalkeeper straight away, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting how there are kind of very specific positions or environments that might kind of create a little bit of adversity. I think goalkeepers is one of those, because if you were to make a mistake as an outfield player, particularly as a midfielder or a striker, for instance, the likelihood that that kind of costs your team a goal is minimal. It can happen, of course, but certainly to a lesser extent than if you're a defender or specifically for a goalkeeper. What I kind of draw from this as well, Martin, is this kind of, he's very caring. Like, there's a lot of support here. So I appreciate this is also his role as captain, but then from a kind of consultancy perspective, I think, and I know that you've had experience with this, like working with athletes, Martin, we want to avoid this, I'm just telling you something because I want you to perform better. Like, you're this vehicle that is there just to do well, kick a ball better, pass a rugby ball better, whatever it may be. There's actually like an investment in the person that's important.
100%. And also, it's kind of, we don't know Modric's motivation for doing this, but I know from being in these situations myself, there's some players on the team that just want to improve everybody around them. Because if I can give you 5%, if I can give you 10%, if I have capacity to do that, and it doesn't necessarily affect my performance badly, then we all benefit. I want to be on the winning team. I want us as a team to fulfill our potential. And that means you performing well, not just me. So if I'm in a position to help other people perform well, then it's going to help everybody. And I think as a kind of an elder statesman, he probably has some buy-in from teammates who will probably, listen to him. It's good to see a player like that taking that opportunity seriously, isn't it? And approaching it in this way, sit down, nice, calm conversation, trying to connect with the person rather than just saying, right, do this. Should we continue?
Yes, I think we should, but I think we need to bear that in mind as we progress through this conversation, because one of the kind of criticisms that's kind of been leveled at REBT occasionally is that it kind of promotes indifference. So, I shouldn't care about not performing well. And actually, it's the opposite. It's because we want to do well, because we want to invest in the people that we work with. That's the motivation or the driving force behind conversations such as these. But I think the listeners might want a little bit more context of what happens next before we kind of reiterate that point.
Okay, let's continue. So he says there, I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't care about you, which kind of touches on what you were saying there, Stu, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's this kind of, when we see where the conversation leads to, it would be very easy to kind of just assume, or just kind of, wonder if, oh, well, this is someone saying, oh, well, this doesn't really matter. Well, yeah, it does matter to them. This is important to them. And it kind of be folly just to think that, well, there's this kind of rational element of, it's just a game and there are kind of bigger things in life. But at the same time, this is important to me. I do really want to do well in this. And that's kind of like driving what the goalkeeper talks about in a moment.
He's saying that I don't see that you're progressing in the team, and maybe it's the pressure. And Modrić also comments. He says that you're radiating uncertainty, which is quite interesting because it's almost that behavioural piece, isn't it? Maybe he is uncertain. Maybe he's nervous. He's not sure about himself as a player. Other players can read that. And when we work with teams, we talk a lot about body language, but this is just basically, the behaviour that bleeds through from the things that you think. So if you are worried about performance, that's going to bleed through with some anxiety that people are going to see, and they pick up on that vibe, and then it spreads. We have that kind of emotional contagion within a team, and it's interesting that Modrić goes on to say that it rubs off on the team. You're radiating uncertainty, and it rubs off onto the team. So how do we help somebody to kind of address their behaviour? Well, part of that is about making them aware that you do know that the signals you're giving off is also affecting other people. That might be a starting point for a potential intervention.
I guess here, like, if we look at this from an REBT perspective, Modrić is almost taking like a CB approach. He's looking at the C straight away. So this is your behaviour, your consequence, your behavioural consequence, and it's influencing other people. So this is kind of what we want to stop. I guess what I want to kind of just raise up here before we go to the next point, Martin, as well, is when we discuss REBT, there's this big focus on actually like disputation of like beliefs, which we're going to come to in a moment. And I think Modrić is touching upon here around like the pragmatism element. So is this helpful? Like, do we think that this behavior is helping us achieve what we want to achieve?
So he's kind of picked up on this. He's noticed this, and he's thinking this isn't helpful for the team. It's not helpful for him. I'm going to try to structure some sort of intervention here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. He asks him. So Modrić asks him, why can't you make a mistake? Everybody makes mistakes. So he's kind of gets the feel that part of that uncertainty, part of that nervousness, maybe is coming from the fear of making mistakes or not wanting to make mistakes.
So interestingly then, we've kind of, it's not just about the specific situation alone. So he's mentioned, well, you're a goalkeeper, maybe it's, that kind of very specific environment, but really it's your beliefs around this that's causing the problem. Because one, other goalkeepers might not be experiencing this, but number two, Modrić is now challenging him to think about the truth behind that belief or that feeling. Is it true that you cannot make a mistake? Well, actually, it's not true, because you can't name someone that hasn't made a mistake, and everybody else does. So this belief cannot be true, which is another kind of disputation approach within REBT.
Let's move on. He says more around this, doesn't he?
Ti se bojiš pogledaš, ko to ne griješi, molim te, reci mi je dobar. Šta ima veze da izađeš ti na centar? Ali to samo je korektiv.
So he says, look, name me one person that doesn't make a mistake. As Stu is referring to there, he's kind of making the point that this desire to not make mistakes, to be perfect, is just unrealistic. That doesn't exist in the human world. You can't name a single player who doesn't make mistakes. And I've used this kind of intervention so many times, especially with younger players who are perfectionistic. They believe that's what they have to be able to progress, and that they use that perfectionism to sort of berate themselves when things don't go well, and they won't go well. Of course, they won't all the time, because it's sport and it's uncertain, and you're a fallible human being. You're going to make mistakes, and I've used that question often. Tell me your favorite player. They'll tell me some famous player that they admire, and then we'll figure out, okay, well, tell me a time where they've made mistakes and messed up. And because they know that player so well, they will give you loads of examples of that person falling below certain standards, falling below their expectations. And it's a nice empirical intervention. It's a nice empirical dispute, isn't it, around the idea of I have to be perfect, and if I'm not perfect, then I'm a loser. And there's this recognition there that even though we're talking about Modrić here, one of the greats, there's this recognition that you will make mistakes. And you just have to accept that, because that's the reality.
I mean, I absolutely love that. And I guess there's a couple of other things that I would draw out of here, Martin. The first is when Livaković says, I didn't get here by being afraid. So we tend to think that, in order to succeed, I have to be perfect. Well, is this necessarily true? Is that belief accurate? In this case, Livaković is saying, well, actually, I got here because I wasn't afraid of making errors. I would make errors, but I would learn from them, and I would persevere and be resilient to such errors. Whereas now he's made it, if you like, and he's playing on the biggest stage. It almost feels, well, I have to kind of jettison the beliefs that got me here in the first place, which is unhelpful, as Modrić is pointing out.
One of the things that I was thinking about, so Livaković is talking here about, okay, I didn't get here by being worried. And I think that sometimes players within a team are looking for license, looking for an opportunity for somebody to say to them, just express yourself. This is going into a World Cup, going into a big tournament. Often the rhetoric around the team, outside of the team, if you like, not the coaches, not the players, the kind of organisation is, look, don't mess up. This is a really big deal. It's really important. There's lots of people relying on this, relying on your performance. Don't mess it up. Don't play badly. Don't let the nation down and whatnot. But actually, internally, one of the things that we can do when we're working with a team is to kind of counteract that a bit and relieve some of that pressure by saying to players, look, you didn't get here by thinking in that way. So how are you going to express yourself if now all of a sudden you're thinking differently? If you're worried, you're tense, you're nervous, you're thinking about the consequences of not playing well, you're concerned about mistakes. That way of thinking hasn't got you to where you are. So why would you change that now? And I think that the dynamics of this conversation is two teammates, and I think that's really important, because I think often players are looking for that license for somebody to say to them, somebody they respect, who has a good place in the team, to say to them, hey, listen, just do your thing, go and express yourself. And I think that's such an important kind of intervention that comes from within the team, and is best placed from this kind of elder statesman position. Do we move on?
Let's move on.
He says there just at the end, you're a great goalkeeper. He wants him to know, he wants to instill some confidence in him that he's good at what he does, which, I don't think you can take that for granted. And I think often the perception is at that elite level that these guys know, I know I'm good. But actually, it's like self-efficacy can be quite a fragile thing, regardless of what level you're performing at.
Yeah.
So to have that reinforcement from such a player, from such an athlete, that's got to help boost something. But the second thing, I know we talked about this before, we kind of went on air, so to speak, is sometimes when we're doing that as psychs, it can feel to players sometimes, and this has definitely been fed back to me, it can feel as if you're just saying that. You're just telling me good things because you want me to feel good and think positively so I perform well. And I think that once you've got a good relationship with an athlete, you're able to deliver that feedback and information in a more credible way from a good place of intent. But when a fellow player does it, I think it's going to come from that place more readily, more automatically. So rather than just instilling kind of fake positivity, I think receiving that feedback from Modrić probably would have quite a good impact, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And there's nothing wrong with kind of making someone feel better in the moment. I always use this example of kind of, if you're in the tunnel about to go out onto a football pitch or a rugby pitch or wherever it is, and you're feeling pretty nervous, maybe that's not the time that someone wants this philosophical discussion about their beliefs or goals. They probably just want to feel a bit better about themselves. But what I quite like about what Modrić is doing here is he's sort of challenging that belief that we're hypothesizing somewhat, but the behavior of the goalkeeper kind of suggests that the beliefs around being perfect or not making a mistake. And so he's taking a more kind of elegant REBT approach.
No, for sure. I think the core of this, Stu, is if I had to summarise this, Modrić senses that this keeper isn't fulfilling his potential, partly because he's held back by some sort of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is affecting GK performance and the performance of other players, the performance of the team. So Modrić gets this sense that through that behaviour, this player might have this belief or this idea that you can't make mistakes and I must not make mistakes. And if I make mistakes, it's the end of the world and it all comes crashing down. And Modrić is picking this up through behavioural cues, isn't he? He's not extracted the belief. He's made an assumption. And to be fair, Livaković doesn't say, no, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. That's not what's happening. He kind of goes with it, which means Modrić might be onto something. And what is Modric's intervention? Look, everybody makes mistakes. Name one player that doesn't. You can't name a single player. Everybody makes mistakes. So that's his kind of rough dispute, isn't it? You have this belief that you must not make mistakes. You must be perfect. You can't stand mistakes. I'm here to tell you from my position of experience and using the evidence of the world that everybody makes mistakes. There's that kind of evidence and logic disputation. And within that, the idea that maybe if you didn't think like that, maybe that might free you up to actually go and perform. So it's got that pragmatic side of it too, which I think is more implied here than necessarily than sort of explicit. So it's only a minute clip, isn't it? There's quite a bit in there that I think relates to REBT and sports psychology per se.
Well, hopefully what our audience kind of pick up on is how, when we watch these clips and we can draw out these really key important parts of REBT, which Ellis was quite explicit about, saying, REBT might not necessarily be the only kind of avenue to explore these things, but successful interventions and successful kind of interpretation of these experiences tend to contain key elements of REBT. They're kind of central tenets that are always there.
Well, I think that one of the things that I think about and talk about quite a bit is, well, let me roll back for a second. The criticism of probably us and our work, and maybe anybody who really ties themselves to a particular approach, no matter what your field is, the criticism you will get is, oh, you always have the same answer to every question. Your answer is always REBT. Now, my approach has been this kind of philosophy of beware of the person with one gun because they know how to use it. So to me, I'd rather learn this REBT and more broadly the cognitive behavioural approach to sports psychology. I'd rather learn that as well as I possibly can, so I can wield it in as many situations as possible. So if I go in with that framework already, feeling like I know what I'm doing and that I can apply this framework flexibly, like anybody can when they develop a skill, they can use that flexibly. And I think that puts me in a better position to solve all sorts of problems or to help in all sorts of ways. Now, does it mean I use REBT for everything that I come across? No, but I'm taking that framework with me. It is informing the way that I see the environment, the performance environment. It's framing the way that I interact with the person that I'm sitting in front of. It's shaping the questions that I'm asking and the view that I'm taking of the answers. I'm biasing myself, but I'm doing it from an evidence base. But I'm not closing the door to other avenues and other potential solutions and other conversations. But I am trying to arm myself, at least, going in prepared and ready with this kind of flexible, theoretical framework. So when we do things like this, Stu, which we've done a few times now, when we take a situation and we overlay REBT to it, we're just demonstrating how flexible REBT is. We're not saying that this is REBT or this is the REBT solution. We're saying that, look, if we put this inside the framework, quite a few of these things fit quite nicely, and it helps us to understand the performance environment.
I guess one thing I'd add to that as well, we actually touched upon that in some other kind of perspectives, perhaps not any other CBT or psychobehavioral perspectives, but we actually touched a little bit on like a personal disclosure and mutual sharing when you spoke about Modrić, kind of talking about, well, you could be a good teammate. Well, that's something that someone can bring to a team. So someone might actually disclose this and say, well, this is the value that I bring. I'm a very good supporting individual for the rest of my colleagues, my teammates. We spoke about referential power in what Modrić is doing. So some research around this area would suggest that rather than sort of like just telling people what to do because you hold legitimate power as a coach or captain, which Modrić clearly has in that team, he's asking, well, what kind of stories do you have about people that have never made a mistake? So we'd label this referential power. So there's these other kind of theories or approaches. Of course, you mentioned self-efficacy earlier on as well, that kind of feed into REBT as well, and REBT promotes implicitly.
Exactly, because REBT isn't a cul-de-sac. It's an avenue, isn't it? It leads off down to different roads, different paths. It gets you to certain places, but then you can take a different direction. So you're not kind of hell-bent on following a very specific, very defined REBT path. It's going to help you in certain ways, but then when you're in the door, when you're actually doing the work, then you've got all these other things that you need to carefully appraise. And you can utilize, would I, as a sports psychologist, would I give somebody positive affirmation? Absolutely. Now, which part of RBT is that? I don't know. It doesn't fit into RBT, but that's just, you're drawing on other frameworks and other evidence bases there to offer that positive affirmation, usually of things that are psychological, things that you have credibility in giving affirmation about. So I think there's quite a bit that's wrapped up in there from a theoretical perspective, and somebody looking at that video from a different framework, from a different theory, would pull out their bits and pieces. And that's what makes psychology so interesting, so amazing to have discussions about, and to figure out, well, what is the best conversation at that point? What would we tweak about what Modrić said, if anything? How dare we, in a way? But just from a theoretical perspective, I'm sure somebody would say, well, if he'd said this, then he might get a better outcome, and he shouldn't have said that. Capturing a live conversation in the moment is something quite special and quite cool, and I don't think we see enough of that really on. Maybe with the new age of documentaries on Netflix, we're seeing it more.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, I'd love to hear, from the audience, listeners, viewers, if they do have different perspectives or different takes upon what we've seen, it'd be great to hear about those.
100%. And also, if there's things that you've seen that you think me and Stu should take a look at, and we could kind of react to, so to speak, from an RBT perspective, please let us know. That's great. Should we call it a day then, Stu?
Yeah, let's do that. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today, and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. See you in the next one.